Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Ultimate Productivity, How to Select and Evaluate Your Managers. First, I want to say happy holidays. We're in the middle of Hanukkah, moving towards Christmas, the new year, and I hope everyone has a great time over the next couple weeks and gets a little chance to breathe. I think the timing of this webinar actually is pretty good because everyone will be in the slow mode, hopefully in the next couple weeks, and maybe you'll be able to take advantage and actually internalize this and think about what we're talking about today as far as your managers. Because managers are a key, if not the key lifeline within our organizations. And without the right managers in the right spaces, it's very difficult and challenging to manage, a company, especially if you're, 10, 20, 50, 100 plus employees. The managers are so critical. So let's start. I wanted to start with a slide. Good to Great. It's a book by Jim Collins, and one of the quotes or one of the concepts in the book really rings true for this particular webinar. And the first thing that's most important for managers or employees, it's getting the right people on the bus. The second part that's most critical is get the wrong people off the bus. And sometimes that's really hard to do, especially when we've gotten to know these people for several years. But it's just not helping the company if we're not moving the wrong people off of the bus. And then finally, make sure we get the right people in the right seats in the bus. And Jim Collins phrases it very well in that book. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. I've learned a lot from that book. He talks about brutal truth and being honest with yourself and your staff, because all you're doing is slowing your staff down when you're keeping them in your company, so it's not fair to them if they're not the right match for your particular company. And then it's not fair to the company if we don't have the right people, the right managers in the right positions. So great book. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And since we're talking about management, it was directly on point. Okay, so I thought also for this particular webinar, let's make it a thinking webinar. A lot of times we're just going through the motions and we're listening, taking it in. But this one, I wanted to make it so that you're actually thinking about it and thinking about your management, thinking about your team members so that you actually become involved in this webinar. So for this first exercise, I want you guys to rate your managers. And you can pick one or you can pick a couple of them. Or you can pick yourself as your manager. It's probably good to do all of them, but we're going to kind of fly through these slides. So I don't know if you'll have time, but maybe write it down. I want you to rate from 0 to 5 these questions. And the first thing is, with management, whether you're the overall manager, CEO, you have a person who's in charge of the office, or whoever's running the organization, and then each of the managers below them, depending on the size of your organization. The first question is, do you have organization charts that are current and clear? Because I think organization charts are a great tool for just understanding as a quick snapshot what's going on with your company at this particular time. How many people we have per division, how many managers we have in the company that are managing what employees. And I find it as a great tool. When we're doing consulting projects, it's one of the first things that we do. Aside from analyze the backlog and what type of cases a client is accepting, the next thing that we would do is really drill down to what's the organization chart and how are we allocating those employees by division within the company and who's managing each piece of that organization. So 0 to 5. 0 meaning I don't have any organization charts. 5 meaning I've got great current organization charts that we just updated last quarter. And while they might not have exactly the number of employees in there, every quarter we do update it. So 0 to 5, 0 being the weakest, 5 being the best. And just write that down. Do your managers track the team members against predetermined benchmarks? So I say a benchmark is a stat or a goal, a target that we're trying to benchmark. Have we set those effectively? Are they good? Do we keep them up? And are we tracking staff members or managers according to those benchmarks? Rate yourself, same thing, 0 to 5, 0 being the worst, 5 being the best. 5, we're rotating our benchmarks, we're always keeping them current, and we're always analyzing ourselves. Can your managers make sound decisions that are a positive impact on the business without any assistance from their direct supervisor? So, do I have managers who can make a great decision without any involvement from the person above? Whether it's sitting down saying, hey, I need to make my own project plan, I need to take this business or my division to the next level, what needs to happen, and then I make a good decision. I may not implement it on my own, but I come up with a great idea that says, I know what I'm doing, I've got my division under control, and I can take it to the next level on my own without someone saying, hey, have you analyzed your numbers recently? Let's try and figure out productivity, or let's try and figure out, are we overstaffed, understaffed, are we hitting our goals? That manager really has control of their own division, can make decisions, and implement those decisions on their own. Same thing, 0 to 5. And then lastly, do your managers execute the goals? You know, whether they've set them or someone else has set the goal, can they just take that project and hit the goal? So out of 20 points, you know, how did you score? By each of your managers or yourself, or however you're rating this particular project. And be honest with yourself. This is, you know, we're not sharing our results with anyone unless you want to. If you want to share them with me, send us an email over at questions@caseghost.com. Send it to me directly, klevan@disabilitylawclaims.com, or klevan@caseghost.com. But ask me how you think that you did. There are several other questions that we would normally include on an evaluation of a manager, but I just wanted everyone to kind of get into the thought process of being able to analyze your team. But this is a great exercise, and I want everyone to kind of be involved with this webinar, even though we're taping it now and no one can raise their questions for any live feedback. But you know, I would think if you scored 20 on this, that's outstanding. You've really got a handle on it. If you're closer to 5 or 6 or 10 points, you know, then something needs to change. If you're in between, then you have to look at yourself and say, hey, am I happy with these results, or do I need to change something within my company? But either way, you know, start thinking about that. You know, over the next couple of weeks, start reviewing your different managers and kind of get a grasp of what's going on within the company. So what makes a good manager? I might say, you know, I need a person that manages my data. So I might say their communication doesn't have to be the best in the world. They need to be able to communicate with me. But as a data manager, I would think that them being able to manage thousands and thousands of data points every day or week and manage a team that's required to go through a lot of data, that would be a requirement of that person. If I were to look at a human resources manager, I would need someone who can communicate extremely well to the staff, that's very receptive and received very well from the staff members, and who can keep track of things and who's very organized, and to be able to document things very well, so that if I want to terminate someone, the file's been updated and everything's been lined up, so that, you know, the person may have been written up once or twice or 3 times and then would be, you know, exited from the company as it's just not a match. And the earlier we identify those people, the less expensive it is for the company. So that might be my HR manager. My office manager needs to be able to run the place. So each manager would require a different skill set. If you have one person that does everything, well, obviously they need to be, you know, very sharp, on the ball, and be able to handle a lot of different tasks efficiently and to keep track of them all. So what makes a good manager? This is another hypo that I wanted to do, just to start, you know, getting us thinking again. So we've got manager A, manager B, And we're going to compare the two as far as who would we rather have on our staff, Manager A or Manager B. So Manager A, detail-oriented. Manager B, works at a moderate speed. So if we're looking at this person, we're thinking, wow, okay, Manager A, they're starting to look good. Manager A is professional. Manager B is relaxed. Well, I'm not, if anyone's been in my office, and I know a lot of people on this webinar who have registered for it have been to my office, relaxed demeanor is not in my job description, probably for anyone in the company. A relaxed demeanor is not, I'm generally not a fan of that. You know, some of my managers have become relaxed, I think, a little bit more relaxed in terms of they're more calm than running around, you know, working extremely diligently, project by project, trying to hit deadlines. I think they have, you know, they're starting to become a little more seasoned, so they can take on a more relaxed demeanor. But generally, I would not be a fan of a manager starting out or really being a relaxed type of person. Manages deadlines well, critical for a lot of the managers within our team. Great with numbers. That's positive, but what does that mean exactly? Can they count? Can they analyze numbers? I'm not sure, but great with numbers is a good skill set. Manages deadlines as well is great. So, you know, I'm leaning towards Manager A right now. Works well with the team. Another good thing. Not efficient at raising staff concerns. So right now, Manager A is looking pretty good, while Manager B is not looking that great. But we've got to really analyze this person in its entirety. So now let's look at the next task, extra social. Well, generally, I don't want my managers to be extra social. I don't want my managers really involved with their team members, because I don't want them to be friends, and I don't want them really to develop a really strong bond with this person where they're not going to feel comfortable you know, notifying the HR manager if something's wrong. They may be more apt to kind of brush things aside if something isn't going as well as it should with that staff member if they're friends. So they might give that person a pass. I always want my managers to take that person as they are. We don't ever treat anyone the same for the most part, because everyone is somewhat different with respect to their personalities and how we work with them. But an extra social manager would be a concern for me. Professionally friendly, I think that's important, to be friendly and courteous and respectful. So I like that. You know, so now my manager B picks up a couple points. Manipulates company policies. Well, that's obviously something I never want from any of my managers. If they do it for themselves and they try and take advantage of the company in terms of, you know, personal time off, you know, showing up late a little bit, I generally do not like that. Is it going to happen sometimes for some managers who have been around for a long time? Probably. You know, they're going to take on that mindset of, you know, I've earned it over the last 5, 10, 15 years. So, you know, this shouldn't really apply to me anymore. That's where you start to get into that gray area, and it brings up some concerns for that particular manager. At least it does for me. Excellent role model. I like that. I like people that are role models for the other staff members. Expresses favoritism. What does that mean? You know, I don't like it when managers express favoritism. As I mentioned before, I do like managers to treat each person individually in the way that they communicate and the way they interact with that staff member, because everyone is different. And I do talk to my managers very differently depending on how they are used to being communicated. Some of my managers are, you know, not aggressive, but they're very deliberate, and they want to be communicated that way. Other managers who are, you know, who haven't been involved in a lot of confrontation or directness, sometimes I have to start off a little slower before I get to my direct point. In either case, I'm always going to be extremely direct with my manager, but my approach is different depending on who I'm working with. Favoritism is different. I don't like favoritism. I do like individuality when I'm talking to people. Excellent communication skills is critical with any management position, except possibly a data manager person who really isn't communicating very much, other than to me. So the communication needs to be very well to me, but since they're not managing a lot of people, the communication is less important than the ability to go through a lot of data quickly to understand how we're doing with respect to whatever statistics or information that we need at that particular time. Lacks clear communication with direct report. Like I said, that one's critical for me. My managers need to be able to come into my office or send me an email, and it needs to be on point. I don't like it when we're not talking on the same level. I always want to be, understand what they're trying to say and what I'm saying to them. Now, it's not always perfect, obviously, but this is usually where my lower level managers fail. If I have a meeting with someone, say my quality assurance manager, who has another manager on top of them, so they're a lower level manager, maybe a lead would be the right title for them. They're not at a supervisor level, they're not at a manager level, but they're just below that. They're learning, they're very ambitious, they can manage a couple people, but their communication isn't on point enough to be able to have meetings with me. So they might come into a meeting and I might talk to them about what they're trying to express, and they're just not going to be on point. So they're not ready to meet with me, they're ready to meet with lower level managers. So that, we do rank our managers as far as, can they communicate clearly, and how effective are they able to communicate with their supervisor. Managing projects well is obviously important. So now manager B is looking better than manager A. So it would really depend on what the project is to be able to select this particular manager. Do we go with manager A or manager B? There are some major concerns I would have for manager A. Manager B, I don't have any major concerns. Some of these things like relaxed demeanor or not efficient at raising concerns, I would have to assess what that was. But at the bottom part of this manager B is looking like a star. So it's very important to understand what makes a good manager for you and for your company. So ideal management skills. I think it's very important for someone to gel with the company's mission and culture. Whatever that is, whatever you're communicating to your team, the management team needs to be on board. They cannot, gossip behind the scenes or communicate badly about the company in any manner. They have to be 100% on board with the mission, with the company, with the culture. And really that's every staff member. If someone's a gossiper or someone complains a little bit, all it does is trickle down. And trickle down gossip or trickle down communication that's not positive for the company, it will have a major impact. And there will be 3, 4, 5 people that become infected by that virus type person. So they have to gel with the company and the mission. Anytime you find out they don't, it's automatic that they need to not be with the company. It's not good for them, it's not good for the company. So it's better to not have them around. Great ability to communicate with the manager. We talked about that on the last slide. Identify critical areas that need to improvement. It's great for your managers to be able to say, hey, Ken, I think that we're doing this wrong, or I think we're doing this right. I want them to be honest with me. I want them to bring things to my attention. I don't want to be overbearing as the overall manager for the company, because then they're not going to want to come to me and talk to me. I want them to communicate pluses and minuses. I want them to be open. I want them to identify critical areas. For me, it's very important that they can execute in their position. We've talked about that in previous webinars. Execute is critical. Execution is critical. We've flagged that as I think the first takeaway on one of our webinars before, as we talk about takeaways, and we try and go through three critical takeaways on every webinar. It's not a critical takeaway for this webinar, but it is always important to execute the product. The most important for management skills, I have to say, is, look, I want a self-motivated manager. I don't want to have to continuously motivate my management team. I don't want to have lunches. I don't want to have events to get them motivated. I want them to come to me and be pumped about their job. I want them to be excited about leading their division. And I want them to be able to want to succeed for themselves, regardless of pay, regardless of anything else. Number one, I think it's so critical for every single manager to be self-motivated and want to succeed. That is definitely takeaway number one for this management ultimate productivity presentation. Reviewing and training managers. How are we selecting our managers? How are we identifying strengths and weaknesses? Are we creating project plans? Are our own managers creating project plans? Can we evaluate the successes and failures of our managers? Do we evaluate our successes and failures, or we just not deal with it? Do we hold managers accountable? Do we evaluate our current managers, or do we just let them run around and manage? Have they been at the company so long that we're afraid or concerned about communicating with them directly? Or do we feel bad when we have to reprimand or deal with a manager in a negative manner? These are all questions that you have to ask and be honest with yourself to say, am I reviewing and training my managers? Are they working within my guidelines? So how are we selecting our managers? How does anyone select their managers? These are just some of the ways. Do we get referrals? Do we do an interview process inside the office? Do we do an interview? Do we post on a job board and interview? Do we hire a recruiting service? Do we give tests when they come into the office? Do we do an evaluation period once they're hired? What are we doing to hire our managers? Personally, number 7, number 6, and number 5, working backwards on the way up, that's kind of how we've done it in our office. At least that's the way we found it to be most successful. Internal mentorship programs, internal interview process, fast-tracking competent staff members that are good communicators that we think are going to be good leaders. That's how we've found it to be most effective. Now, some positions are very hard to do that with. Technology team members, our IT director, we had to use a recruiting service. HR managers, we've tried to use recruiting services. It failed several times when we tried to hire an HR manager. So eventually we really mentored someone who was a good communicator, and we kind of brought her along, and she's a great HR manager. But we were never successful at hiring an HR manager because that HR manager never really adopted or adapted to our corporate culture. And it goes back to that slide that we were just talking about. If someone isn't on board with the culture and the mission of the company, are they ever really going to be the right fit for a staff position? And are they ultimately ever going to get to a management position because they're just not on board? So if we hire a manager and they're just never on board, if you find that out from the beginning, don't keep them around. It's just going to prolong the pain of having to let go of this person, especially once you've developed personal attachment to that person. So it depends on the position, but what's worked best for us is that internal mentorship, the fast tracking, and the internal interview process. But having said that, it's important to say, if someone's great at doing work, and then all of a sudden, because they've been great at just getting work done in the office, to escalate or promote them to be a manager, sometimes and oftentimes that fails because we're picking a person who's great at doing day-to-day work who doesn't have the skills to be a manager. And then what ends up happening is you've taken this person who was great at this other job, who wasn't making that much money, we've given them a raise, now all of a sudden they don't know how to manage, they're frustrated, you're frustrated, they're earning more money because they've been promoted, and now the person ends up either leaving the company, you fire them, it just never connects again because they don't want to go back to what they were doing because they feel bad, and So whenever you are promoting people within the company, make sure that you're interviewing, make sure that you're evaluating, make sure that they're going through an evaluation process before they get to that management level. I think that's so critical to make sure you're not advancing the wrong person. Strengths and weaknesses. If this were a live webinar, I would be saying, hey, raise your hand if you know all of the strengths and weaknesses of your managers. It's so important to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your managers. What is your manager's best skill set? Are they great at numbers? Are they great at overseeing and making other people productive? Or are they, great at communicating with people and, understanding other people's skill set to put other people in the right positions on the bus? So, what is our manager's skill set? What is each manager's skill set? Is our manager able to assess critical needs, critical issues, critical areas? Can they create their own game plan? Do they follow up independently, and can they execute on their own? Are they on point when they communicate? And communications come up a lot. Communication with managers, it's very important. If they're not communicating with you and you aren't getting what they know about the company, well, then there's a failed communication with the manager. Do they understand numbers and deliverables? Those are also critical. And takeaway number 2 would be, look, we need to know our manager's skills to be able to put them in the right seat on the bus. Do your managers create their own project plans? And if they don't create their own project plans, do you create project plans for them so that they can analyze their own team members or they can complete a project? Do they identify projects? Do they communicate what a successful project means so that we can set aggressive deadlines and continuously update and revise our project plan? We need to keep it simple. But we need to do this. We need to have project plans. We need to do project plans by division depending on the size of our company. This is very important. Most important is we really need to know what a successful project is. Is it to reduce staff and make staff members more productive? Is it to provide the best customer service to our clients so we get a lot more referrals from our client base? What are we looking to do on that particular project? We need to understand what a successful project means. We need to evaluate successes and failures. We need to talk to our managers and deal with those issues. We can't just be happy with the manager and not let the manager know, hey, great job, just because they need to know what we think a great job is. We need to also be able to say, hey, what happened on that project, or what's going on with your team? Why hasn't so and so been written up, or why is this person still in the company? And if you're the direct manager who deals with the day-to-day, if you're a 10 or 15, maybe even 20 employee company, I think I did that. Pretty much manage the day-to-day up until we had 50 or 60 employees. You need to be able to deal with those critical issues. You need to be able to communicate with the lower level managers as the head manager, or your partner, whatever it is. Are you effectively communicating? Do you have efficient meetings as a manager, or do your managers have efficient meetings, or are they in conference rooms for hours a day, talking about issues and taking up staff's time? Now they're, meeting with someone for a whole hour. That's a long meeting. My meetings with my team members, unless it's something special, I try and keep them around 20 minutes. It's a 20-minute meeting. I try and have them send me an email before the meeting so I can understand what's going on. I don't want them sliding me paper after paper saying, go ahead and read this while they sit there. That's a very inefficient meeting if they're giving me things to read and just watching me read. I don't need to be babysat or managed on reviewing documents. I want to know what this meeting's about. I want to know the agenda. I want to know what we're going to discuss, and I want to see what they're presenting beforehand. And I want them to be able to tell me in a summary. Within a couple minutes, I want to know what's going on, depending on what we're talking about. So, communication, efficient meetings, expectations. I want to know what their expectations of their team members are and what my expectations should be. Are they setting them and are they meeting them? Are we hitting deadlines? Are we learning from the project that we just did? Or are we making the same mistakes over and over and over? Mistakes are great. Failures are great. We learn from our failures. It's not the best feeling at the time when we're failing at something, but if we fail, we need to figure out what we failed at. We don't want to keep failing at the same thing. That's a failed project. Hold managers accountable. I can't tell you how often when I go to a company and I see what's going on, and I evaluate that company, I can't tell you how many times I've seen managers just not get held accountable for not doing something. Holding managers accountable is critical. Communicating directly and bluntly with your management team is critical. Now, there are different ways to communicate. Some managers respond well to, yelling almost and being extremely direct. While other managers, you have to be direct, but in a softer, more manageable tone. Everyone communicates differently, and you have to understand which one your manager is used to. Because if your manager is used to very direct, blunt communication, and you kind of go around about and you don't really talk about it, it's going to be it's just not going to succeed with that particular person. Others, I would never go roundabout. I try never to go roundabout in a communication, but I just might approach the subject a little bit differently. But communicating directly and on point and honestly with your managers and your staff, very important. Honest and direct. Assess your manager's reaction to constructive criticism. It's the worst thing to have a manager when you're working with them and you see something that just didn't work or something that was wrong, and then you talk to them about it, even though it's very uncomfortable for yourself because your managers put you in this weird, awkward position. But you get the strength and you're like, fine, I'm going to deal with it. I've got enough stuff going on. I'm going to court. I'm doing this other business. I've got these projects, but I'm going to deal with it. And then all of a sudden you bring it to your manager's attention and they get defensive and they tell you how it wasn't their fault and it was everyone else's fault, and that's the worst. If you have defensive managers that are just fighting you on everything, you might want to think that they are not the right manager. And it's important to deal with that, because not only is it not good for you, it's probably not good for them to be in that type of position, getting defensive over everything all the time. Fighting with your managers is the worst feeling, and as a business owner or operations manager, or any type of manager, it's just not a good feeling. Same with the managers dealing with their team members. I always encourage my managers, especially within the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, to not be afraid of letting new staff members go. Now, they don't get to do it on their own, most of them. They would have to bring it to HR and it would get documented. But within the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, if you're not on the same page as someone that you're working with as a manager, you need to let them go, because it just keeps getting worse. It never gets better. Everyone's dealt with people, everyone's dealt with managers on this call, everyone's dealt with other employees, and when people don't gel, it doesn't miraculously happen. Out of the several hundred employees we've had over the past 10 years, I have 2 employees that probably should never have made it through the whole process. Right now, they're actually great employees, but they really never should have made it through all the different kind of problems that we encountered with that person. We gave them, maybe 5 or 6 passes, I would say, and out of the 100 or so people that we've done that with early on in the company, 2 have worked out of that 100. So, giving people extra passes and letting them, just continue to stay on the bus when we all know that they shouldn't be on the bus, you can't do it. It's the same with managers that react to poorly to constructive criticism. Okay, so for the last exercise in the presentation, what I want to do is I want you guys to evaluate current managers. If you don't have any managers and you're a small business, evaluate your current employees this way. Write it down. Take their names off the top of the piece of paper. Employee A or manager A. We don't want to have any personal connections with this person. because personal connections are going to skew our real decision. We want to be brutally honest on this evaluation. Whether you take it or leave it, at least get the real data into your head, and then you can deal with it in whatever manner you want to be. But be honest with yourself in this evaluation. We remove all personal connections from our managers that we're talking about in this particular situation. Treat them as if they're coming in for a job interview. All right? Would you hire them for their current management position? You have to think about that for a minute. What's that person's skill set? What are they responsible for? Do they manage people? Do they communicate well with their team? Do they communicate well with you? Would we keep them in that current position? Something to think about. If your answer is yes right away, boom, great. Hopefully everything's perfect with that manager. They're great at everything they do. That's the best type of manager, right? Hopefully we're all saying that to ourselves. But I'm going to guess that we're all not saying that to ourselves. Next question. Would you hire them for a different management position than they're currently in or interviewing for? Because they've got a certain skill set and we just haven't done a good job putting them into that position. Now with managers, I've done that a couple times. I've rotated managers based on their skill set. I've moved managers from managing a group of, applications, intake, retainer team members, and then move them into other, management positions that don't require as much productivity monitoring as that particular manager would be required to manage. Because when you're managing, intakes, retainers, applications, that's a very numbers-oriented person, and they have to be dead on with their stats. And move them to more of a position that requires much more communication, less number-oriented positions. I do that with my managers, especially when I have a nice selection of managers. I've got some that are great at doing projects, while others that aren't great at doing projects. And having that flexibility and being able to adapt to your manager's skills is, I think, a very important part of running your business. So would you hire them for the different management position? And then lastly, would you hire them for any position at all? Would a manager that you currently have who's been with you for 5 or 10 years and they know everything about the company, if they don't fit with what they're currently doing, if they don't fit with a different position, a different management position, would you hire them for any position? And you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Whether that manager's been there for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And it's never comfortable to let a manager go. That I can guarantee, unless all of a sudden there's this big fight and drama. But even in that time, it's going to be hard to let that person go because you've just got a really strong bond with the person. But at the end of the day, as a business owner, we need to do what's best for the company, what's best for the entire staff. And if it requires letting go of a manager that's been there for a couple years or 5 years or 10 years because they're not helping the company and they're actually hurting the company for whatever reason, then we need to do what's best for the company. And that is sometimes extremely difficult, but it's important. So today, a recap of the takeaways. I like today's presentation. I think it was a fun one, very interactive. I wish that it was live. We've got, actually coming up in March, I think we may have mentioned this before, but we're doing a human resources type boot camp. It's an A to Z blueprint on how to manage your staff and with HR, with everything. It's with Ken Hardison. We're very excited about that. I think it's March 6th. March 6th? March 6th. I'm getting the nod on the side. It is March 6th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Plantation, in our office. The other thing that I recommend, and I've recommended it before, is Ken Hardison's mastermind groups in his Titanium group. And we work with a bunch of peers. I can't stress enough the value that it gives you. Talking to people on the same level and interacting with the group. We're actually going to start a peak performers group, Ken Hardison and me. where we're going to do and work with about 30 to 40 individuals in a group setting and then individually. So we're very excited about launching that this coming year, and we're very excited about rolling that out. But as far as a recap of today's takeaways, number one, self-motivated managers. Evaluate your team. Make sure you have self-motivated managers. Having to motivate your managers is not where you want to be. It is a big drain. And if you can trickle that down so your entire staff is self-motivated, then you are doing an outstanding job. Your managers are picking the right people, you're picking the right people, and if you do that, you're going to succeed. Your business is going to thrive. And it's very hard to do that, but if you can do that all the way down the line, great job. Great job. I'd like to hear your successes and failures on this one. I'd love for you to send me emails at questions@caseghost.com. I think we're going to start a blog pretty soon so that we can start posting things and dealing with questions and issues, my experiences, your experiences. I'd like to really get a community going so that we can all learn from each other. Takeaway number two, know your manager's skills. It's so critical to be able to shift your managers around and get them in the right seat, in the right bus. We need to do that and do what's best for our company. We have to always do what's best for the company, even if it hurts so much. You have to do what's best for the company, because if you don't, your company's not going to be around. This is, for attorneys, it is a very competitive time. For Social Security attorneys, it's not only is it competitive, but we've also got the Social Security administration being tougher. The judges are obviously being trained to be more difficult, grant less cases. So we have to treat our company as number one and do what's best for the whole company. And sometimes it requires difficult decisions. But I know you guys can do it. I know you're going to figure out what's best for your company, and I know you're going to, over the next couple of weeks, really analyze your current management team. And I want to hear your takeaways. I want to hear your self-evaluations. Take your name out if you want to. Send it anonymously somehow. I'd love to hear them. I want to be able to talk about them, in our future webinars. Next one, maybe we'll talk about employees and managing employees, or we'll talk about something. I don't know. They'll probably give me some cool topic to talk about. Anyway, what are we doing?
Scrubbing cases.
Right, that's right. The next one I think is going to be scrubbing cases, or looking at your backlog, and really dealing with the changing the changing win rates for the judges. I think it's very important that we all look at that and evaluate our backlog so that we're not working on cases that aren't going to be winners in the next year or two, and not staffing that entire backlog when we're not going to win cases anyway. It's been a big change over the last year or two, and we've got to look at that. We've got to know how to do it the right way. So that may be the next one, or we may follow up on this one and talk about maybe a more interactive webinar after you've already completed your evaluations. So we'll take it step by step. Everyone have a great holiday, and thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. We've got who I am on the last slide, and then we've got questions on the following slide. You can always email questions@caseghost.com. Email me, klevan@disabilitylawclaims.com, or klevan@caseghost.com. Thank you for your time today. Have a great holiday, and I wish you all the best.